Hi everyone, this is Kian and Faye from TransLink, and we're here to share some insights from Transport 2050, TransLink's largest ever public engagement. We're leading the communications and the engagement work streams here, and we're speaking on behalf of a very talented team. So thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it. I know there's a lot going on in the world right now, but we appreciate your attention and interest. So at the end of the session, we hope you'll understand both what we did and what we learned in TransLink's Transport 2050 Phase 1 engagement, and that ran from May to September of 2019. And you'll also understand how we're creating the new regional transportation strategy. I hope you find this interesting and useful. So what is Transport 2050? Well, to understand that, we have to know what TransLink is first. And I'm going to put out a little quiz here. So I'll ask, is TransLink A bus company, B, a bus company in Northern Ireland, or C, an integrated multimodal transportation authority? Well, if you answered B or C to that question, you would be right. There is a TransLink in Northern Ireland, but we are TransLink in Metro Vancouver, and we are indeed an integrated regional multimodal transportation authority. So what does that mean? Well, we fund, plan, and operate an integrated transportation system. So that means transit systems, bus, SkyTrain, West Coast Express, major roads and bridges, a regional bike network, and increasingly new mobility. Our service area covers about 1,800 kilometers, which my colleagues tell me is about the size of Fiji. And we are legislatively mandated to create and update a regional transportation strategy by the province. So what is an RTS? A regional transportation strategy, and why do they matter? Well, they're important because they set out the region's projects, services, and policies for transportation. And this is a shared strategy between the province, between regional government, between municipalities. And it doesn't matter how you get around, whether you're a transit user, a driver, a cyclist, a walker, the RTS is going to have an influence on you and how you move around the region. And we owe a lot of our quality of life today and our transportation options to the forward thinking of the past. So the region's first RTS came in 1993, Transport 2021, and now about 30 years later, almost all of the major projects that were promised have been delivered. And so that's why at TransLink, we're asking what's coming next. But in order to answer that question, we need to understand both where we are now and what's on the horizon. What are the things that are going to affect us in the future? And to put this into context, Metro Vancouver is a really rapidly growing region, both population and economy. So today, 1.6 million people call Vancouver home. Sorry, in 1993, 1.6 million people called Vancouver home. Today, 2.5 million people call Vancouver home. And in the next 3 decades, we expect the region's going to grow by another 1.2 million people. More people equals more trips. It's as simple as that. So what's the current regional context? Well, as I mentioned, Metro Vancouver is a very large and growing region. It's a very diverse region. We have 23 jurisdictions that compose, municipalities that compose Metro Vancouver, and some challenges that we're dealing with at the moment include affordability. So this is a key issue for the region. 22% of renters spend more than half of their income on rent. And we're asking questions about how can transportation and transit-oriented development, how can that help households shed the expense of a car? Congestion, this is a problem that is not unique to Metro Vancouver. Our reliance on car trips is high. Most of our workforce commutes by car, and congestion, it makes it really hard for people to know how long their trip is going to take. And this affects everyone who's using the roads. It's not just the drivers, it's the people who are using transit buses as well. Congestion costs the economy up to, between $500 million and $1.6 billion a year. So this is a major issue. On the climate change side, climate change is already here and the effects are intensifying. So currently we're dealing with forest fire smoke. There are municipalities that are looking at buying out homes as sea level rise encroaches. And by 2050, this is only going to intensify. We're looking at more than a doubling of the number of hot summer days. And the days of intense rainfall could increase 20 to 45% So we're asking, how is this going to affect people as they move around the region and as we plan our transportation system? Importantly, in Metro Vancouver, transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions, and it's our responsibility to reduce our emissions. Our regional government has adopted a regional target of carbon neutrality by 2050. So we're asking, how can transportation help reach our climate goals? What's the transit situation? Well, in short, ridership is at an all-time high. Since 2002, our population's grown by 26%, but transit trips have increased by 117% in the same period. And I think maybe a lot of the people on this webinar may note that, well, transit ridership has been showing signs of decline around North America. It's really unique and promising that a place like Metro Vancouver is growing ridership. But of course, you know, this is a bit of a double-edged sword because this has led to crowding on buses and trains in peak periods. And without additional investment, we think that nearly half of all of our bus routes are projected to be overcrowded by 2023. So let's think about the future. Technology, I mean, obviously it's changing how we live every day, but it's also changing how we move. And we think of 4 converging trends are going to reshape transportation. The first being automated vehicles. So these are being tested in cities around the world. And big businesses, you know, we're talking Google, Apple, GM, they're making big bets on the future of automated driving. Some of our earlier research has shown that most passenger vehicles sold in North America by 2050 could be capable of some form of self-driving. So the question is, how do we get automated vehicles right? And of course, in just a few years, I think by 2025, we expect that all new road vehicles will be able of communicating with each other in some day, and in some cases, the street. Thirdly, electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are really coming on strong. In British Columbia already today, 9 or 10% of new vehicles are electric. And our provincial government has some pretty serious legislation in place. By 2040, all new vehicles sold must be zero emission. So electric vehicles are definitely on the rise here. And finally, one of the last trends that we're looking at, or one of the major trends we're looking at, is sharing. We know the sharing economy is here, car sharing is here, but micromobility like shared e-scooters and bikes and other platforms are coming online. And we're looking at how micromobility, shared micromobility, can help solve some of the first mile, last mile challenges. So how will these trends impact transportation? That's where Transport 2050 comes in. And we're really looking at how can we build a strategy that will, you know, get the best of these trends to make life better in Metro Vancouver. What are we doing from the public affairs side? Well, our mantra is that a regional strategy requires regional input. And that's where Transport 2050, our largest public engagement, comes in. And what we're trying to do, well, one, we're trying to build our reputation. We're trying to get the region excited. We want to get as many people from different backgrounds participating. And once we get this strategy in place, as early as next year, we can start implementing it. So Faye will speak shortly to the engagement side, but I want to speak about the communications and marketing side of things. So I'll go a little bit over our history and some of our successes. So broadly speaking, on the comms and marketing side, what's our mandate? Well, we've been asked to be bold, be loud, be inclusive, and to use all the channels that we have at our disposal to tell the story. So how are we framing this conversation? Well, broadly, this is around the region coming together to create this strategy so that we can help address the region's most pressing priorities and leverage those new technologies, those new trends on the horizon. And really what we're doing is trying to ask the region to think big. How do we do that? Well, a pretty unprecedented marketing communications campaign. There's a few examples on the screen here. We had this marketing campaign based around what do you want in the future, A, B, and we're asking questions like, hey, by 2050, sea level rise is here. Would you rather adapt to it with higher dikes or adapt to it with underwater transit? You know, when we're thinking about the future, what do you want? A, more parks, or B, more parking? So we're asking these fun, provocative questions all over Metro Vancouver. So online and social media, on our system, so inside buses and inside stations, billboards, radio, newspapers, movie theaters, even physical activations. So on the screen here, you can see these turnstiles that we're asking the question, what do you want more of? You can walk through one turnstile, it's more buses, another is more trains, another is more roads, another option D is more bikes. I have to say the sea level rise question received a lot of attention. Social media, we got a lot of emails about that one, so I think it was probably mission successful in generating interest. This is a fun example on your screens before you. So they say imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. We're actually generating some fan fiction with this campaign. This comes from Expo line memes for transit-oriented teens, which is a Facebook group of transit enthusiasts. And basically, they're sort of copying our message tone and our branding and you know, asking this question online. So it's always fun working on the project to see this sort of thing. All right, so what else do we have? We created a landing page at transport2050.ca, and that's where we drove all of the web traffic. And from there, we linked to the engagement portal. We had all sorts of content. We had information on transportation trends, and disruptive forces like automation and climate change. I had our discussion guide and our videos and all the technical documents, the things that our stakeholders needed to see before they made a submission. We had our event listings. So our engagement portal had the survey. We had a public survey where we asked for values, concerns, and priorities. And we also had an ideas board, which is kind of a fun online platform where you could pin your transportation ideas. And you could submit ideas, you could like other people's ideas, you could vote on ideas, you could comment on them. So it was pretty fun. We got a lot of attention with this, and Faye will speak more in depth about the ideas part of the engagement. But this was really great because it gave us A, something to talk about all the time because there's always fresh content, and B, it generated a lot of media attention. So that was pretty fun. As I mentioned, we use all of TransLink's channels. So on the earned media side, we had a launch event. When we reached a key update or milestone in the project, we sent a news release. On the digital content side, we have something called the Buzzer blog at TransLink, which started out, I guess, as a physical newsletter type thing about 100 years ago. Well, it's now a blog. So we gave project updates through that. We listed community events, provided space for thought leaders from our partners. On the social media side, we used the hashtag Transport2050. We put out all of our content from the video side, as well as questions from the AB campaign. What do you want more of? Parks, more parking. And of course, we had our event series. So we had a series of public events on futuristic events like mobility as a service, micromobility, a bunch of things. And this is my final slide. So how did all this land? How did it roll out? Well, I think we're pretty pleased with the results on the digital content side. So the blogs, the website, the event live streams, we had about 12,000 views. On the social media side, I think we posted about 170 posts across a variety of platforms, and we reached about 1.3 million people with reach and impressions. And on the media side, we had about 70 hits in phase one. 99% of them were neutral or positive, which I consider a win. And a lot of the media stories were picking up on the technology aspects, or what was the most interesting or provocative idea submitted. And so when you put this all together, I think it's safe to say that we're successful in generating awareness, interest, and getting the region excited. So that's the comms side. I'm going to hand the presentation over to my colleague, Faye.
Thanks, Ken. So as Ken said, once they generated that interest, it was our job to take it and turn it into some kind of results that we could use to shape our regional transportation strategy. So in Metro Vancouver, we really have both a diversity of spaces and communities and people who live here. So everything from bustling city centres right through to rural villages, and people from various different backgrounds, places of origin, educational levels, and levels of interest in transportation planning. So the challenge laid down to the engagement team by our Mayor's Council and our board was to make sure that as many different people as possible took part in this process so that we could ensure that we were shaping a future wanted by the majority of our region. The first step in this process started inside TransLink with the design of the engagement program. So it's really important to make sure that you're asking the right questions of the right people at the right time. TransLink follows a structured decision-making process. So essentially, where there could be many right ways to answer a question, we ground our decision-making in values. And that's where we decided to focus phase 1 of our engagement in asking people what they value about where they live and how they move. So in this first round of going out to the public, we just had 6 key questions, asking people what they value about where they live, what matters to them when they move, and how it is that they want to live in the future. We have 6 key groups that we wanted to reach through this process. Everybody from elected officials at our 3 levels of government, through to our stakeholders at various different levels, the public, our employees, First Nations in the region, etc. And it's really important that we made opportunities for everybody to take part. So sometimes those opportunities exist already. For instance, our bus operators meet in the transit centres every morning. So we were out from 1, 2 and 3 a.m. To speak with them with those Timbit incentives. In other cases, we partnered with groups who have access to these audiences. So Success and Empower Me are 2 local groups who support newcomers to our region and people who speak languages other than English. We also have an internal group, the User Advisory Committee, that focuses on people who have physical or cognitive differences who use our system. And then where there weren't existing groups that we could partner with, we created our own. So we created a regional agency advisory group of members of planning departments from around the region, and also a youth advisory committee of 20 youth of various different backgrounds. Some are in education, some are working, some are neither in education nor working, to help us reach as many different people as possible. We also really made an effort to meet people where they are. So like many organizations, we focused a lot of time and energy on digital engagement through the engagement portal that Kian already spoke about, and we drove people online to collect the data. But we supplemented this by meeting people throughout the region. So over the summer, we visited every one of our 23 metro municipalities at least once, focusing on events that were already attracting an audience so that we could ensure we were meeting a diversity of people. At the larger of these events, we were able to take our branded engagement bus. There's a photo here on the left-hand side. And people kind of walked in, they had an engagement experience. They were educated at the front of the bus to find out what Transport 2050 was all about and hear about some of that ACES content that Kian spoke about. And then at the back, they could sit down and take the survey at their leisure. Meeting in person was a really important part of our process because it served a dual purpose. It's not just about gathering input from the people that you meet, but also about providing them with a positive experience of your brand. So we all know that there are daily frustrations on a transit system. Perhaps you can't get on the bus or the bus cuts you off. And this is just another way for people to experience your brand in a way that they can enjoy. Our summer efforts culminated in our first ever Expo at the fair at the PNE, which is BC's longest running and most attended attraction in the summer. It attracts 750,000 people annually and really helped us reach a very diverse audience. So our talented outreach team put together a transportation expo that both gathered input for Transport 2050 and allowed people to experience the future as a way for them to think about what might change. So in the near term, we partnered with car share and scooter share services that people could try out. And then in thinking about the longer term future, we actually had virtual reality goggles where people could choose their own adventure and really think about what might change over the next decades. When all's said and done and we tallied up at the end of the summer, we had our biggest ever engagement. So we did more events than we'd ever done before through both public events and stakeholder workshops. We had almost 160,000 conversations, and we had almost 32,000 survey responses, which actually tops what we get through most other projects when all phases of engagement are added up. But what we're really most impressed about with our engagement is that we heard from people across the region. So here you can see the share of the regional population on the left, and then the share of the survey responses on the right-hand side. So we're really pleased to see that for the most part, this matched quite closely with our different communities. And that was important both in terms of having fairness of representation in input and also in winning over our decision makers. We also engaged people who get around differently. So something that we do find as a transit agency is that when people don't understand our role in supporting cycling, walking, and even roads, we often get a higher proportion of transit user participation than car driver participation. So this time around, we made special efforts to reach people who drive to work by leafleting, for instance, at park and rides. And we're really pleased to see that about a third of our participation came from people who primarily drive. We're also really pleased to see that our efforts to engage those different groups, perhaps people who don't necessarily feel invited into other engagement sessions, paid off. We had a really high participation from people who speak a language other than English or French at home. We're really proud to say that our Youth Council helped us reach an unprecedented share of youth participation, and we're really pleased to see that we also reached a good number of people who identify as Indigenous. In terms of what we heard back from our input, it wasn't overly surprising for a West Coast community. So people told us that they love being outdoors, they love parks and nature, and as Keen alluded to, they're concerned about housing affordability and congestion, as well as the changes that are happening to our environment. When people think about the future, regardless of how they themselves commute to work, they agreed that transit expansion and improvement should be top priorities, and everybody was looking for an efficient, cost-effective, and environmentally friendly way to move around the region. We also got 4,000 plus bold and creative ideas through our ideas board. So the pictures that you can see here are user-provided content, and you can see that they really run the gamut from big ticket items like gondolas that will take people places that buses are not very reliable, to more easily to implement things such as pedestrian scrambles. So as Keen said, we saw a lot of engagement here. One of the most voted for ideas was the idea that we would introduce more shared vehicles. And then the most commented ideas were to do with mobility pricing, those in favor and those against. In terms of how we're using the information that we heard, it's split now into two different streams. So we've taken the most transformative of the ideas that we heard through the ideas board, and we're bundling those into network concepts that we'll take out into phase 2 engagement. Other promising ideas are going to make it into the draft strategy, which we'll take out in phase 3. And what we heard from people about their values has been used to shape our vision statement for the future, and also the principles of how we will achieve what we've said that we'd achieve. We thought carefully about what we could say to you about when you're running your own engagements as a result of what we've learned through this first phase of work. And we have 3 key ideas to share with you. One is to make your project a corporate priority. So certainly in terms of the reach that we've been able to generate, we needed to have the support of senior leadership internally in order to do some very different things. We would never have been able to get to the PNE to make that financial output and also resource outlay without the support of senior leadership. We've also been repeatedly encouraged to go beyond the transit bubble and make sure that we're speaking to people who travel differently or who may not necessarily respond to a transportation survey. It does take an extra effort. We know that we hear from our super keeners every time, but it's well worth going out and speaking to the masses. And then the last piece of advice that we have for you is just to make it fun. So when it's fun for you, it's fun for the people that you meet on the street, it's easier to get them involved, and it's easier to keep the motivation going internally. Lastly, we'd just like to say thank you to the team that we work with, because as Kian mentioned, this is most certainly a team effort. We took our planners out onto the street with us to engage the general public this summer, and we wouldn't have been able to make such a big effort without them. So we really appreciate their help, and we're looking forward to the next phases of engagement.